begin to fly. And so let's break down a couple of the rumors that were circulating. One talk was that months before the murders, Charlie had been kicked in the head by a farm animal, which had caused a head injury. And that, some people said, oh, well, he was injured by this farm animal. It kicked him. I think it might have been a horse. And he just wasn't quite right after that. His personality changed. She just seemed different.
Right.
That kind of thing. But later on, there was an autopsy performed, and it showed no signs of a brain injury or brain damage that could have been caused by like a traumatic head injury.
Right.
And now this is kind of an interesting thing here. So when this crime happened, of course, it was Christmas, and there was a young medical student in town who was studying at Johns Hopkins University, prestigious school, who happened to be in town and assisted with this autopsy. And he even took Charlie's brain in a jar up to Johns Hopkins University to be studied.
Wow, I guess this whole area is like in shock.
Right.
Right? I mean, because here's a family man, hardworking family man. I'm sure everybody knew him. And with all those kids. And
the community was just completely like grief-stricken, did not understand what had happened.
Even this
it was shocking.
Visitor, if you will.
This made national news.
Yeah, this was
just like, wow.
He's trying to do something to help give him answers, it seems.
Yeah, so later it was noted, once the brain was transported up to Johns Hopkins, to be studied, that Charlie's brain was noted to be relatively small. And there was also a portion at the center of the brain that was seemingly like underdeveloped. And it was also, put in this jar, studied, whatever, but now the location of the brain is unknown. So they don't know if, like, once it was studied, if Johns Hopkins University, like, destroyed it, or if it's still someplace on a shelf somewhere in an archive, who knows?
Yeah, it'd be interesting if that brain was still around, what they could do nowadays with imaging and what they've learned about the brain.
Exactly. So, again, the autopsy didn't show any signs of any kind of brain injury, that kind of thing. But then again, who knows what science, was like then. I mean, it's so far advanced now. Well, other rumors swirled that Charlie Lawson hadn't murdered his family at all, but he had actually witnessed some kind of organized criminal activity, and that the family was murdered by some gangsters. Which, I mean, this could have kind of made sense, because you have to think about these murders were 1929, and, bootlegging and moonshining was still a thing back then, because prohibition wasn't lifted until 1933.
Right.
So, I mean, it could have been that maybe Charlie had seen something he wasn't supposed to see.
Yeah, and that's about in the middle of prohibition there, almost, a little bit further along, but it was a lot of money being generated at that point. It was a big deal.
I think, if you really think about the case and kind of put the pieces together, what is the likelihood that gangsters would have rolled up on this home and murdered this whole family and left behind this one shotgun, and Charlie takes that same shotgun and goes out to the woods and shoots himself?
And not get the guy who crossed him in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, it just doesn't really...
That could be something like someone trying to save face on his reputation, maybe.
Yeah, or just one of those salacious stories that just kind of added a little more, like, pizzazz. Or maybe it was a story that it just made them feel better, like...
Right.
Because it was just too...
Because they really couldn't accept what's happened.
Horrible to think about this family man turning on his entire family and just slaughtering them. Well, years later, a book called White Christmas, Bloody Christmas put forth a brand new theory. And this one's actually pretty interesting. Anonymous sources, some friends and relatives, say that Marie Lawson, the 17-year-old daughter, was having an incestuous relationship with her father and became pregnant. Yeah.
That is salacious.
Well, a 2006 book called The Meaning of Our Tears provided more evidence of this theory, including an interview with Marie's best friend at the time, who revealed that Marie had confided this secret to her just days before the murder. However, the autopsy made no mention of Marie's pregnancy. So whether they, knew she was pregnant, maybe just didn't document that on the autopsy. Maybe they thought, well, this is already tragic enough. We're going to save face for this family. We don't need to reveal all the secrets.
Or maybe she thought she was pregnant, but she really wasn't.
Yeah, or maybe, again, this could have just been a story made up by,
That's pretty interesting, though.
The local gossip.
Author felt strongly enough about it to, put forth a new theory.
Put it in 2 books.
Right.
Because she wrote the first book, then wrote the second book. And then you've got to think about as well if Marie was having some sort of incestuous relationship with her father. Was it a consensual relationship, or was she actually, being sexually abused?
Right.
Right? So I think that's another aspect to the story that kind of makes it a little murky, those details. Well, the Depression was about to hit. I mean, you got to realize this is 1929. The stock market crashed. Some folks said that maybe Charlie was having money troubles. Maybe he knew that the stock market crash was, not going to be good, and he was having money troubles. And, they say that this winter in 1929 was incredibly brutal winter, lots and lots of snow. So maybe he was just freaking out, didn't know if he was going to make it.
So, yeah, that brings up the idea of when you hear of these cases of fathers, for whatever reason, they can't, financial trouble or something's going to happen that's going to affect the whole family, and they kill the whole family and themselves. Just so it's,
Yeah.
Right. Just because they can't take care of them, they don't know what's going to happen to them. And that's like a whole thing that we're going to look more into. When these fathers kill their whole family and then themselves. A lot of times it is that.
So are you saying that could be a Mountain Murders afterthought? That could be some bonus content?
Yes,
Ooh.
It can be.
Well, sadly, the only survivor, Arthur, the 16-year-old, was killed in 1945 when he was only 32 years old in a car accident. And he left behind a wife and 4 kids. And the 8 Lawsons are interned together at the Browder Family Cemetery. And they have a tombstone that's kind of shared, big tombstone. And the inscription says, "Not now, but in coming years, it will be a better land. We'll read the meaning of our tears, and then sometime we'll understand."
Wow.
Yeah.
I'd say the town folk had input on that.
Well, now get this. So Charlie Lawson's brother, Marion Lawson, later opened the house as a museum and offered tours of the crime scene.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, he claims he was raising money for the orphaned son, Arthur, because, this poor kid's left behind. He needs money. And this is a weird little fact. So the cake that Marie had baked on Christmas Day was on display, I guess where she had placed it on the family's table, dining room table or whatever.
Right.
To have that Christmas Day, she puts the cake on the table. It was left there. And visitors who were coming through, were stealing the raisins off the cake. And so they eventually had to place the cake under a glass.
Yeah.
Because people were coming in and picking off the raisins to have a little bit of a souvenir, if you will.
So what is that, forever cake? I mean, it's not molding or anything?
I mean, I don't know.
I want some of that cake.
Well, this is an interesting piece to this as well. So not only was the home opened as this crime museum, which just was very unusual at the time. I guess we've always had dark tourism.
That's true.
Very morbid. We've always been fascinated with morbid things. So if you're listening to true crime podcasts, some people tell you you're a weirdo and a sicko. Well, I guess people have been weird and sick since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
Because here you go in the 20s, people want to steal raisins off the death cake. So freshly escaped from prison, John Dillinger made a trip to the home with his girlfriend and an accomplice when they were on their way to Florida. And Dillinger even left a note on the door taunting area lawmen. Hey, I'm America's Most Wanted, and I was here, and you couldn't catch me kind of thing.
Wow.
Yeah. So it had hit the news wires and was such a big story that even John Dillinger decided to check out this crime house.
Oh, wow.
And as I mentioned before, in 1929, the winter was reportedly tough, lots of snowfall. And they were saying that the snow was so deep on this Christmas Day that family, friends, and deputies had to transport the bodies out of the house using bed sheets on some sort of like makeshift sled just to get them like down to the main road where the hearses were waiting.
Wow.
Yeah. And Madison's Yelton Funeral Parlor took the family in. I guess the local funeral parlor, I can't talk today, was too small to accommodate these, what was that?
8 bodies?
Well, 9, I guess. 10?
Oh, yeah, 9, yeah.
Yeah, I guess it would have been 9 because there were the 7 kids and the 2 parents, so it would have been 9 bodies. And they just didn't have room, so they had to transport these bodies to a completely different funeral home. And they were saying that on the way, well, I guess the day that he, Charlie Lawson did this or whatever, on the way out to the woods, he actually took the 2 dogs, Sam and Queen, with him into the woods. But it made no mention of whether or not he, shot the dogs as well. But, here's this guy, murders his family, and then takes the dogs out to go hang out in the woods and contemplate what he had done. And onlookers and visitors to the house described the cabin as completely blood-soaked, and just the house was in total disarray.
Now, did you say the 8 of them were buried together?
Yes.
So they didn't bury Charlie with his victims?
Well, I guess he was buried with his victims.
That's crazy. I don't know why they wouldn't just, I guess maybe they didn't really believe.
So maybe it was 9.
Him.
Maybe I have my math wrong. I'm a little special when it comes to math.
Well, it's okay.
Well,
but
again,
it did say they were all together, didn't it?
Yeah, they were all buried together. And, if you go online, you can find a lot of images of the cemetery, the plot, the graveside. I actually have some photos that I'll be glad to post on our Patreon page for our patrons to check out. I have some crime scene photos. I have some photos of the actual funeral with all of the caskets lined up.
Wow.
And they're they're very old photos, and then a couple of old newspaper clippings as well. So I'll be glad to share that with you guys. But there, like I mentioned, have been a couple of books written about this. There was a murder ballad that's been covered by multiple performers, including our local Doc Watson, amazing, mountain folk singer, bluegrass guy. And there's even been a couple of documentaries made, and one of the newest documentaries that was actually just released here in the last few years is called Trouble Will Cause. And they derive this name, Trouble Will Cause, from Charlie's suicide note. Now, remember earlier I said, we'll get to that in a minute. He had 2 notes in his pocket that were addressed to his parents, and none of them made sense. One of the notes said, trouble will cause. That was the only 3 words. And then another one said something, that was very cryptic as well.
Wow.
So it was like he just didn't even finish his thought before he killed himself.
Sounds like Charlie may have had a mental break.
You think so?
Maybe. I mean, just everything. But at the same time, he wasn't completely out of his mind because he was very methodical. Sending the older son away, taking everybody to town.
Right.
That you have to take a little organization back then. You don't just go next door. You got to go to town and get the new clothes and.
Well, that's the thing. If you really look at the bigger overall picture of the story, I mean, it seems this was a premeditated murder.
Right.
As you mentioned, he took the family to town. He bought them new clothes. He had this portrait, knowing this was going to be like the last time that they were all together, and wanted to document, this is my family.
Right.
And the portrait is very eerie. Like, if you check it out, and I'll post that as well on our Patreon page, as well as on Facebook, and we'll send out a picture on our Twitter page. It's like, here's the whole family, and in the picture, Charlie's kind of like looking off, like almost in a corner and not staring directly at the camera.
Wow. And
has like this really weird smile/smirk kind of on his face.
That's strange.
And he just looks very vacant. I don't know. It's a weird picture.
So we already
especially when you check it out knowing